Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, honestly. It's 12:13 now. I'm recording our first class, or it's the second class, or it's the second meeting. So today we are going to talk about the class in general, the American literature in the 20th century, and then we will discuss some of the major terms that we are going to discuss. Okay, so before we start, let me just explain to you that when we talk about the 20th century American literature, it does not mean that we have to start at a specific time or a specific date. So the 20th century literature may start at the late 19th century and end at or end on the late 20th century. So that's the the period where we call the 20th century literature. Okay, so I would like to start with the two major terms that are very important when it comes to literature, and especially American literature. The first term is realism, and the second one is naturalism. Now I'll explain these two terms, and then you can read about them. And next time we will discuss the first author, which is mentioned in these pages, the 19 pages that we have. Okay, so naturalism and realism. What is the difference between realism and naturalism? Here, there is an explanation here that I'm going to talk about. Realism and naturalism are closely related terms in American literature history. Terms that authors, editors, and critics used in the late 19th century and early 20th century when debating the purpose of literature, the role of literature in democratic society, and the future of literary expression. Both terms used to describe a rejection of the past. So the similarities that both terms describe the rejection of the past, and to make the claim that the writers in the current generations were doing something new and distinct from their predecessors. Okay. That's the second thing. And because these terms were used widely for such different purposes, they are slippery and elastic. Sometimes they are used interchangeably, and sometimes they appear as opposite because they are such close cousins. Realism and naturalism can be understood as a set of attitude. And here, this is the definition for both terms, as these are as set of attitudes and tendencies rather than as clearly distinct literary periods. So they are attitudes, okay? So naturalism and realism are very close and related terms. Now, one thing that I have to explain to you is that naturalism has nothing to do with nature, has nothing to do with, with the Romantic period. In fact, naturalism and realism are against, nature and the Romantic movement, okay? They are against imagination. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, realism was commonly identified as an emerging force in American fiction. Both novels and short stories, realism implies a rejection of the romantic, and here's that's very important, is a rejection of the romantic, heroic, exaggerated, and the idealistic view of life in favor of detailed, accurate description of everyday life. So simply, realism is a reaction against romanticism, or the romantic, heroic exaggeration, because romanticism focuses on imagination. But realism focuses on the real life, the detailed and accurate description of everyday life. So if you want to distinguish between these two terms, simply romanticism or the Romantic period has to do with imagination and then the exaggeration, whereas realism focuses on the real life, what you see on the streets. The characters are presented as ordinary people involved in the normal moral dilemmas of life. That's for realism. Some proponents of realism, and indeed some of its opponents, understood American realism can be adaptation that borrowed from the best of European fiction. However, because realism focused on the manners and speeches, and here this is very important, of the common people, okay, some also believe that realism could play a special role in the United States by presenting both unreflective cultivate a democratic society. Okay, so they believe that, because realism, focuses on the external world, the world outside, and it focuses on the real and normal ordinary people who live in the outside world. And that's why, realism is a kind of a reflection and cultivation of a democratic society, because it shows you the poor, the rich, all kinds of people without prejudice, without, discrimination. That's a realism. Now, if that's realism, then what's naturalism? And here we have some examples of realism. Realist was more of a label of convenience for critics than coherent movement. The works considered then and now as realist diverged in significant ways. Mark Twain's fiction employed regional and class dialects to comic effect, and often with sharp satiric edge. So here, examples of how, realist, focus on realism is the writer Mark Twain. He's known for his realistic fiction, okay, by focusing on class dialects. Henry James is another realist also. He extends his dramas of upper class into the flow of interior thoughts and pushing realism towards stream of consciousness. Please, guys, go and find what stream of consciousness means. This is a kind of an assignment for you. This is like a job that you have to do. And other characteristics of literary modernism. In the depiction of coastal Maine, Sarah Orne and Jewish emphasized how a way of life could be deeply rooted in a landscape and its history. Abraham Gahan turned similar attention to the lives of working class Jews in New York. So simply, you focus on the external world, the people outside, their lives. In spite of this diversity, naturalists asserted that realists focused not too narrowly on the middle class and professional classes. Now here, look, the difference between naturalists and realists. Naturalists believe that the realists focus too narrowly on the middle and professional classes. So the middle class and the professional classes are more, presented. Naturalists also, they claim that the lives of the poor and the marginalized required more dramatic form of literature to depict the powerful forces that were shaping American life at the turn of the 20th century. So simply they believe, the naturalists, that the realists ignored and did not, focus more on the lives of the poor and, the dramatic life that they live, okay. Naturalists also frequently draw on social interpretation of Darwin evolution. So naturalists believe in the Darwinian understanding of evolution, that the idea of the survival of the fittest, that the strong and the fit people are able to survive, whereas the poor and the weak people will perish and will die. So they basically, depend or derive their theories and notions from the Darwinian theories of evolution. So they employed as a lens to understand the struggles that they saw around them, particularly largely economic contests between capital and labor. They were frequently pessimistic about the ability of contemporary society to deliver justice because they understood the human world as driven by animal instincts that lay barely beneath the surface of the polite society. So simply here, they say that they have a pessimistic, idea about life. Why this pessimism? Because they believe that the world and that we human are driven by animal instinct. We are driven by animal instincts. And that's why we have the idea of the survival of the fittest, the survival of the fittest. Read that, please, guys. The Survival of the Fittest by Darwin's, okay? Okay. And here, this is the story that we're going to read, which is Dreiser's sister Carrie's sisters Carrie. The narrator observed our civilization, and here this is very important because we have to read this. Our civilization is still in the middle stage, scarcely beast, in that it is no longer wholly guided by instinct, scarcely human, in that it is not yet wholly guided by reason. So simply, if the world is not guided by reason and it's guided by instinct, instinct means that the animalistic instinct. So and that's why, you know, the world is pessimistic and things will lead to disastrous and tragic ends. With the interest in the primal forces driven human conflict, naturalist fiction frequently relies on plots which instance of dramatic violence. So whenever you read a naturalistic fiction, you will find dramatic violence. Unlike realist, in realist fiction, you may find happy ending with, you know, like, you know, if there is a problem, the problem will be solved. In naturalistic work, the problem does not solve. Here are examples of naturalistic subject matters ranges from Stephen Crane's Ode and Terrified Union Soldiers in the Red Badge of Courage to Frank Norris and Upton Sinclair's expose of the power of capitalism in The Octopus and the Jungle to the portrait of the psychopathic characters in Norris McTeague and Jack London's The Seawolf. Unlike The Octopus, London's The Call of the Wild was at once profoundly naturalistic novel and instinctively romantic fable. In London fiction, though human nature seemed inevitably to go wrong, it may be saved in rugged environment where civilized notions such as self-gain are no longer useful. By asking questions about the fundamental laws of humanity and human progress, here you go. By asking questions about the fundamental laws of human and human progress, naturalist fiction provided a means of deep inquiry into the meaning of human existence in world that could be both hostile and cruel. So the world is hostile and cruel, and that there is, you know, this pessimistic and negative idea of the outside world, not like the realists. The realists, sometimes they try to show you some, you know, positive and, you know, happy ending for the work. But while naturalists, you know, they show you the negative side of it. Okay, so these are the differences and the definitions of naturalism and realism. You'll find a link on YouTube where I put, you know, the definition or the differences between naturalism and realism. Please read them and try to understand the differences between these two literary terms. Now, the author that we are going to read is called Theodore Dreiser. Okay, this guy is a naturalist. Now, there are other, you know, authors who are realists, such as Mark Twain or Henry James. Henry James and Mark Twain are realists. Now, Theodore Dreiser is naturalist, meaning that the person that we are going to read will find some kind of description of harsh reality, that life is so difficult and hard to deal with. Theodore Dreiser's uncompromising portrait of American society, including frank discussion of sexuality, money, and social class. So everything is discussed without any fear of taboos or any fear of, you know, the boundaries imposed by the society. Earned him a substantial following in the first half of the 20th century, and they continued to attract widespread readership. With more than 20 books to his name at the time of his death, Dreiser was a prolific author with a long career that stretched from the turn of the 20th century through the Great Depression. He remains best known for his novels, which ask the readers to consider the precise relationship between their complex character and the carefully described social environments that they inhabit. Theodore Herman Albert Dreiser was born in Terre Haute, Indiana, on August 17, 1871, the 11th of 13 children. His German-born father was stern, emotionally distant, and successful in providing for his large family. Dreiser later called him mentally a little weak and drew upon him as the prototype for the failed men who appeared as frequently in Dreiser's novel. Dreiser's mother, by contrast, was steadfastly devoted to the well-being of the children. She was, Dreiser's claimed, the only person who ever loved him enough. She too appears in fictionalized form in many of Dreiser's books. Okay, Dreiser's unhappy childhood haunted him through his life. And here, unhappy childhood is very important. The large family moved from house to house in Indiana, dogged by poverty, insecurity, and internal division. One of his brothers became famous popular songwriter under the name of Paul Dresser, but only siblings lived turbulent lives that only defied their father's rigid morality, but placed them on the margin of respectable society altogether. Dreiser as a youth was ungainly, confused, shy, full of vague yearning, like those of most of his fictional protagonists, male and female. From the age of 15, here these are the explanations here. He tested what he learned from his experience and his report against what he was learning from his independent reading of, among others, Charles Darwin's. This is very important because he read Charles Darwin's, and this is one of the things that influenced him as a naturalist, as a writer who writes about naturalism. Okay. Okay. And here, generally speaking, these thinkers agreed that human beings, just as much as other life forms, were participants in the evolutionary process in which only those adapted successfully to the environment survive. So this is the survival of the fittest, the one that I mentioned before. Read about it. It's about the Darwinian idea of the strong and the fit will be able to survive. The weak will die and will not be able to survive the environment. Spencer in particular argued that human consciousness was itself a product of evolution process, and that it entailed the adaptive capacity of altruism and various forms of social cooperation. The tension between, on the one hand, deterministic chimism, as Dreiser called them. Okay. On the other hand, the potential for friendship and the improvement of social institution appears in Dreiser's fiction throughout his writing career. Early on, Dreiser emphasized the mechanistic side of his tension, while in later phases in his fiction and in his social writings, he appeared to balance his more pessimistic views with the belief in the possibility of social justice. Okay. Now, this is very important. Sister Carrie is, I'll leave this for you to read it by yourself, okay? I just want you to read Sister Carrie, because after you read this, we will start discussing, the story itself, which is from Sister Carrie. It's a novel by Theodore Dreiser. Please, guys, what I want you to do is to read about the author, Theodore Dreiser, and read about the novel, Sister Carrie, okay? And I'll be asking you some questions about the author and the work itself, about the themes, about the main ideas, the plot, the character, etc. So please, guys, prepare, because this is very important. That's all for today. Thank you very much, and see you on Tuesday. Bye.